Welcome once again. This is Pinnacle Professional College, and we are bringing you another lecture on audits. And so please take and stay with me. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, you are missing out. So please subscribe to this channel, hit the subscribe button. You can join our Telegram group as well. Please join our Telegram group. Our Telegram group is simply Pinnacle Professional College. Pinnacle Professional College. Pinnacle Professional College. So if you're having issues trying to find our Telegram group, you can leave a comment on this video and we would certainly send you the link. So here we'll be talking about ISA 620. ISA 620, and we'll be talking more about the definition of an expert and using the work of an expert. There are situations where the auditor uses an expert. The auditor uses an expert. Now, what do we mean by the auditor uses an expert? So first of all, we need to understand who an expert is, right? So an expert is someone and who possesses skills and knowledge within a certain area or within a certain field. So in this context, an expert or the auditor's expert is someone who possesses knowledge and skills and experience in fields other than accounting or auditing. Other than accounting or auditing. Very, very important. Very, very crucial. Other than accounting or auditing. So that's something you need to know. There are times when the auditor would deploy the services of an expert. The auditor may use the work of an expert to provide knowledge that is relevant to the audit, which the audit firm do not necessarily possess. So the auditor does not know everything. The auditor only knows matters relating to accounting and auditing. There are times when in the performance of the auditor's duties, they would need an expert to help them in their audits. ISA 620 gives a number of examples where experts may be used by the auditor. So there are a number of examples. So let's look at some of these examples. It includes legal opinions, right? The auditor is not a lawyer. So the auditor cannot give legal opinions. They only give audit opinions. So they will need an expert in that area. Number two is specialist valuation areas, such as property or pension liabilities. So employing the services of a valuation expert. Another place where an expert may be needed is in the analysis of complex or unusual tax compliance issues. Unusual tax compliance issues. This is also an area where the services of an expert would be needed. Very, very important, right? Very, very important to understand. Very, very key. Note that the ISA covers the work of the auditor's expert and that the expert is employed by the auditor. This is something very, very important to always know. People usually forget this or miss this point. The expert is not employed by the entity or the client. The expert is employed by the auditor. By the auditor. It's very, very important. The objective of ISA 620, which is about auditor's experts, is to allow the auditor to decide whether to use the work of an expert. So the auditor must decide, do we actually need the services of an expert? And also to assess whether that work is adequate, whether the work of the experts is adequate. Extremely important. Extremely important. So, one of the things that the auditor needs to do is to assess the competence, capability, and objectivity of the experts, right? The auditor must assess the competence, capability, and objectivity of the expert. Why? Because the full responsibility of the audit opinion lies in the hands of the auditor. So even though the auditor might use an expert, the auditor has full responsibility of the opinion that they give. And therefore, if they are bringing someone on board as like an expert to help them with the audit, they must make sure that person is competent enough so that it doesn't dent the opinion that they are given. It's very, very important. So how do they assess the competence of the experts, right? Number one is through their personal experience with previous work of that expert. So if the auditor has had some form of working relationship with that expert before, they're able to assess the previous work of that expert. They can also do that through discussions with the expert, by having conversations with the expert or discussions with the expert. They're able to unlock some of these things, try to assess the competence, their capability. They can also discuss with other auditors or others who are familiar with the expert's work. So you can discuss, the auditor can discuss with other auditors, right? Or even discuss with others who are familiar with the expert's work. It's very, very important. The fourth thing is by assessing the expert's qualifications, their membership of a professional body. So qualifications play a huge role here. Qualifications play a huge role here. The auditor can certainly assess the qualifications, right? If you look at the qualifications of the experts, you can tell whether they are capable or not. Then another way, which is the last way, is through published papers or books written by the experts. This is usually applicable when it comes to academia. Now, let's talk more about assessing the work of an expert. ISA 620 requires the auditor to apply the procedures set out below when using the work of an expert. The auditor shall obtain an understanding of the expert's field of expertise. So the auditor must have some basic knowledge or understanding of the expert's field of expertise. That is enough for the auditor to be able to determine the nature, scope, and objective of the audit's work, of the expert's work, of the expert's work. So they must understand the expert's field of expertise. That will give them sufficient understanding to be able to determine the scope of the audit, of the expert's work, and the objectives that relate to the expert's work. Very, very important. Number two is the auditor shall also agree terms of engagement with the experts, right? So what are the terms of engagement? When we say terms of engagement, in our previous lectures, if you haven't watched our lecture on engagement, terms of engagement, please do so. We are talking about, one of the main things we're talking about is the respective responsibilities of the experts and the auditor. The confidentiality requirements. So they need to agree the terms of engagement, with the experts, including number one, the nature, scope, and objectives of the expert's work, and the respective responsibilities of the experts and the auditor, the form of the expert's reports, and the confidentiality requirements. These are all under terms of engagement. They also need to evaluate the adequacy of the expert's work. So how do they do that? Or what do they do? The auditor will check the reasonableness of the expert's conclusions. Is their conclusion even reasonable? Is it consistent with the auditor's audit evidence? Is it consistent? Do we see some similarities here and there? Are the assumptions behind the expert's work reasonable? And the data that the expert uses to perform their work, is it relevant? Is it complete? And is it accurate? So that's how you evaluate the adequacy of the expert's work. Very, very crucial. Very, very crucial, very, very important. Now let's move on to the next slide. Let's move on to the next slide. Using the work of an auditor's expert, ISA 620. Using the work of an auditor's expert, ISA 620. Now, let's talk about this bit, which I feel is very, very important, extremely important. Reference to the auditor's experts in the auditor's reports. As I already mentioned, the auditor has sole responsibility for the audit opinion issued. So the auditor takes full responsibility or sole responsibility for the audit opinion. And this is not reduced in any way by its use of an expert. So if you use an expert, if you don't use an expert, at the end of the day, the auditor has sole responsibility for the opinion. Therefore, the auditor should not refer in their report to the use of an expert unless it is required by law or regulation. So the auditor should not refer in their audit reports of the use of an expert unless it is required. There's a caveat there. If it is required by the law or regulation, you can go ahead. Even then, if the auditor refers to the expert's work in his report because it is relevant to an understanding of a modified opinion, then he must make it clear that such a reference does not reduce his responsibility for that opinion in any way. Now, there are situations where in making a reference, right, they make a reference, the auditor may make a reference because it is relevant to understand why a modified opinion or a qualified opinion was given. In such situations, the auditor must make it clear that such references does not reduce his responsibility or her responsibility for the opinion in any way. So at the end of the day, what are we saying? The auditor has full responsibility, even though they employ the services of an expert. They have full responsibility for the opinion. They give the opinion and they must own it fully. So this approach reinforces the point made earlier that the auditor remains fully responsible for the report produced, even if evidence on which it is based was produced by others, right? So if you deploy the services of an expert and you arrive at an opinion based on their work, you still take responsibility for your opinion as an auditor. The auditor therefore cannot simply accept work performed by expert. The work must be evaluated. So because of that, that's why the auditor must evaluate the work of the expert. It's the same thing when it comes to internal audits, relying on the work of the internal audit department. I included this when talking about experts because it's a similar situation. You know, if you are relying on the work of internal audit as well, again, the auditor is responsible fully for the opinion. In many instances, the work of the external auditors and internal auditors may overlap, particularly when internal audit departments carry out financial audits. So in principle, the external auditors may be able to reduce the amount of testing and checking they carry out for the external audits by relying on the work of the internal auditors. So there are situations where the external auditors rely on the work of the internal auditors. However, there's a problem, and this is what we describe as the external auditor's problem. In this situation as well, as we saw in the use of an expert, the auditor is fully responsible for his opinion on the financial statement, even if he has relied on the work of internal auditors. So it's very, very important. Even if the auditor relies on the work of the internal auditors, they are still responsible for the opinion fully. So in this case, the auditor must therefore must evaluate the internal audit department and see whether they are worthy of being relied on. They must be satisfied that they can rely on the work of internal auditors. to support the opinion or the audit opinion. So that's very, very important. They must be able to see that this internal audit department, are they competent enough for us to rely on their work? Because at the end of the day, the auditor takes full responsibility for the audit opinion. So this is where we bring today's lecture on the use of an auditor's expert or relying on an auditor's expert and the internal audit department. Thank you for listening. If you haven't joined our Telegram group, please do so. It's Pinnacle Professional College. If you're having challenges getting on our group, you can simply drop a comment on this channel and we'll respond. Thank you and have a good day. Bye.